No sooner did U.S. President Donald Trump gladly announce a mutually consented cessation of hostilities between America, Israel, and Iran, and the truce sits on shaky ground and could easily collapse, given accusations of violating the pact by all parties against the other. Though it brought a fleeting entire day of positive hopes and relief, all of them wilted and melted away once the accusations flew and Iran quickly shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians have no problem dragging this impasse for as long as it could, knowing now the huge leverage it holds against an impatient U.S. president who has no clue how to climb out of this hole he himself dug up. As a result, the entire planet continues to sit on pins and needles and bear the brunt of soaring gas prices and the skyrocketing cost of survival. Tonight, we're joined by independent journalist Chris Casquejo to tell us his insights. Good evening and good morning, Chris. Welcome back.
Good morning from Washington, D.C. Good to be with you.
Okay, we're very interested to hear your thoughts and your views about tonight's topic. You know, the last few weeks have been punctuated with strikes, missile hits, and retaliatory marks from different fronts. So for those that are trying to catch up, or viewers, can you tell us exactly what has happened in the past few days? Who's escalating now at this point? And how close are we to a full-scale regional war involving the U.S., Iran, and Israel?
Yeah, let's take you back to February 28th when this whole thing started. The U.S. and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury and killed Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Iran retaliated by launching missile strikes on U.S. bases in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Israeli cities. Iran responded by closing the very important Strait of Hormuz, and it caused the largest oil disruption in history, according to the International Energy Association. And that brings us to this past Tuesday when U.S. President Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that a whole civilization will die tonight unless Iran reopened the Strait of Hormuz. And after that, a ceasefire was brokered by Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif within 2 hours of that 8 p.m. Tuesday night deadline. Now, the ceasefire was already showing signs of strain by Wednesday, April 9th. The Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed, and Iranian's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said that 3 clauses were already violated in that ceasefire agreement on day one. Now, Iranian state media says the war death toll has more than 3,000 people killed there. Lebanon says that more than 300 people were killed in the Wednesday strikes alone by Israel, according to the Lebanese health ministry. Now, Iran says if the escalation continues, the Houthis will close the key Bab el-Mandeb Strait too. The bottom line is we are probably one miscalculation away from a wider regional war. That's why these talks in Islamabad are so important.
Okay. Turning back to the recent events, critics have called out the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz post-haste as perhaps U.S. President Donald Trump's paramount excuse to engage with Iran on a 2-week ceasefire with the hopes to cut a deal to end the war and slow down the surging cost of living in America. Then there is also the over 450 kilos of enriched bomb-grade uranium that America, Israel, and the EU wants out of Iran's hands. Any of those 2 bullet points in Iran's 10-item list could scuttle the talks or drag the timeline indefinitely. Now, are you seeing the glass half full for both parties to cut a deal given these considerations?
Well, there is some agreement that they want to talk, so that's at least a good sign. But Hormuz is Trump's most urgent economic issue, but it's also Iran's biggest point of leverage. You know, we know that it controls 20% of the world's oil supply. Now, Iran's 10-point plan claims that enrichment rights for that uranium that you mentioned are non-negotiable. But U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Iran can never have nuclear weapons, which is why the U.S. and Israel started this war in the first place. Vice President J.D. Vance here in the U.S. dismissed the public plan as written by some Yahoo in Iran, and now we have learned that at least 2 versions of Iran's plan exist, one in English, one in Persian, and they have different statements on uranium enrichment. Apparently, the Persian version says the U.S. in principle committed to acceptance of enrichment of uranium enrichment, which Washington flatly denies. So we're going to have to see how those negotiations go. The White House says that that 10-point plan was literally thrown in the garbage after Trump said that it was workable. Now, Iran is demanding that it can have the right to charge tolls to pass through the Strait of Hormuz and split the proceeds with Oman, which is on the other side of the strait, and that is something that Donald Trump opposes. Axios reports that these are going to be the highest level talks between the U.S. and Iran since President Jimmy Carter visited the deposed Shah of Iran shortly before he was thrown out of power in 1979, before the Islamic Revolution.
Okay, broaching more on the fact that the ceasefire right now is on shaky ground, that Pakistan helped broker, seeing, as you mentioned earlier, Israel rushed to bomb large parts of Beirut, and we've got tons of casualties, 182 casualties and hundreds more wounded. There have been those that say that a possible taking out of Israel out of the picture is what would be needed to make these deals push through. What would your thoughts be on that?
Yes, we've learned in the past few hours that Trump actually called Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, asking him to be more lower key in Lebanon to protect the Islamabad talks. Now, Netanyahu's advisor, Ophir Falk, refused to confirm any scale back on the part of Israel, and he hailed the Beirut strikes as the largest operation against Hezbollah since the 2024 Patriot attacks. Now, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam is heading to Washington, D.C., opening a parallel diplomatic track, signaling that Lebanon wants to negotiate directly with the U.S. Now, former Pakistani Ambassador Masood Khalid says the atmosphere has been poisoned before the talks have even begun. Lebanon's prime minister has declared a national day of mourning with flags lowered in the country. So Trump has reached out to Netanyahu, but it's not clear that Israel is going to scale back, and that could put these talks in peril. But he does control the levers. He could stop supplying weapons to Israel. He could cut them out of the process. But we haven't seen any sign that he wants to do that beyond this phone call asking Netanyahu to be more lower key.
Okay, let's talk about U.S. political diplomatic affairs. There seems to be a growing rift in the Trump's MAGA base as a result of the Iran war. Allies are calling out that, Trump, that the use of Amendment 25, should be used against Trump in the Constitution to take him out of power. With Trump's popularity on the plunge and poll numbers continuing to tank, what are the chances of a blue wave in November's midterm polls and perhaps recapturing both houses of Congress, which could ultimately maybe lead to a third Trump impeachment? Your thoughts?
Yeah, let's start with the open disagreements among Trump's MAGA base. It is now public. Trump has attacked by name in a 482-word Truth Social post Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones, calling them nut jobs with low IQs. This comes as Trump's approval with MAGA is down 5 points to 92%. Republicans overall down 5 points to 81%, and those who voted for him in 2024 down 6 points to 76%. So he still has a majority of the voters that he won in 2024, but among all voters, a UMass Amherst poll reports that his approval rating is 33%, which is a second-term low, with 53% of all voters strongly disapproving. Now, CNN also reports that Trump has a 37% approval rating, 61% disapprove. The chances of a blue wave, Cook Political Report, which is a widely respected publication, says that it has shifted 5 U.S. House races toward Democrats. But, it's not clear whether the polling is going to hold in the Senate, where Republicans enjoy a very small majority. We have to watch the races in Alaska, Michigan, and Maine to see who's going to control that chamber. And even if Democrats win controls of government, it is unlikely that impeachment will result in conviction of Donald Trump should lawmakers choose to bring a third impeachment against Donald Trump, because you need 2/3 of senators to convict. And it's unlikely that even if Democrats win a majority, they will win that big of a majority, because not even that many seats are up. As far as the 25th Amendment, yeah, some of the Democrats this week floated the idea after the civilization will die post on Tuesday night. But again, it hasn't gone very far because Republicans control Congress. So we'll just have to see how this all plays out in the next couple of days in Islamabad, and whether there are more escalatory threats if talks break down.
Okay, in an interview, Chris, the other night, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said his boss, the president, is an impatient man who wants to get a deal done quickly. However, we've seen before that Iran will not easily bend and play hardball on demands where they believe they have leverage. And we have talked about it. Right now, we have recognized they do have leverage. But I'd like to ask you, what kind of strategy do you think the U.S. is going for right now? Are we talking about forcing a deal quickly, or are we looking at a more longer-term confrontation?
Yeah, I think that the fact that they are talking is a good sign, and that they are high-level talks is a good sign. But I think that to get a more lasting agreement, it's going to take much more negotiation. I mean, this is all happening because Trump decided to scrap the Iran nuclear deal that happened under President Obama, and he said that it was very disastrous. So Iran does have many leverage points, specifically the Strait of Hormuz closure, which has impacted so many different countries. But let's hear from some experts. Trita Parsi from the Quincy Institute says that Trump's failed use of force has blunted credibility of American military threats, and Iran has entered these talks with Islamabad with complete distrust of Washington. The bottom line is that Tehran is probably going to pace these talks, but the U.S. does have some leverage in that it can continue bombing and end the ceasefire to get Iran to agree to what it wants, which is to stop its nuclear program and to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, lastly, what would be the key signs that we around the world should be watching for in the next, say, 48 to 72 hours that tells us what's going on, what is going to drive this forward, and whether this is escalating or moving towards a real deal?
Well, we've learned that the Iranian delegation is already in Islamabad, Pakistan as of last night, and it's led by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is departing today, and the U.S. delegation will consist of Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Now, signs that talks are breaking down is if there are lower-level substitutes on either side participating in the talks, or if there's an early walkout, which would indicate there are major red flags and that they cannot agree on those major points, which is reopening the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's nuclear program, specifically the right to enrich uranium. Iran has floated a plan where it says that it wants to charge tolls for any ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, which would add major costs for energy around the world, and anybody who relies on crude oil from the Middle East, any countries that rely on crude oil from the Middle East. So we're going to have to see whether there's any movement on that demand that they have laid out. And we have to listen to what is coming out from the leaders. New Iranian leader, Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei has declared that Iran won the war, and he's demanding compensation, and which is setting a kind of maximalist tone going into these talks in Islamabad. Also watch Trump's Truth Social account to see, whether he escalates the threats against Iran, which would signal that the talks are going poorly. So, it is just a very fast-moving and fluid situation, but so much depends on these talks.
Yeah, it seems even though it seems that there's a pause in paper, there's still conflict on the ground. So for now, a pause, a very volatile one, and not quite peace yet. Thank you so much, Chris Casquejo, for your insight. Always a pleasure.
Good to be with you as always.